Hi, I'm Nick Speed and you join me today at Lindome Lakes. Today we're on the Loco. Now, lovely lake, open water lake, loads of fish in this lake and all sizes as well, but the fish we're going to be targeting today are going to be the edge fish. The edge fish generally average in size between 8 and 15 pounds in size, so good size fish, and obviously we're going to be catching them down the margins. Now there's certain little tweaks that I've had to do to my peg in order to fish the margins properly, and so I'm going to explain it just bit by bit really what I've done. And this information isn't just about this venue, it's about any commercial venue you go to, about fishing for edge fish and why we do it, how we feed it, what baits we use, and more importantly, when we actually do it, and what I mean by what part of the day. And if you're in a match situation, timing it, so you're doing it at the right time of the day when you've got a greater chance of catching these edge fish down the margins. So, as you can see, down the margins, I've had to cut my peg out. Now, on certain venues, gardening is permitted, but on other venues it isn't. So what you must do is ensure that you're sticking to the rules and that you've checked that you are allowed to garden or you're not allowed to garden. Now, gardening, what's it about? Well, to be honest with you, it's so important this. It's about fishing in the correct depth of water. That's all it is. These fish, a lot of these open water lakes or any commercial you go to, you always see the big fish topping in the middle of the lake, and they don't seem to be caught until the last hour of the match or even the last 20 minutes of the match. Or whether you're pleasure fishing, you haven't caught any big fish, you come to pack your tackle away, you come to check your peg to see if you've left anything, and all of a sudden you see tails at your peg. Because these big fish are clever. They know when to come down the margins looking for food, i.e. when nobody's about. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to make the fish think that there's nobody here. So by cutting a gap in the banking, is kind of like camouflaging ourselves from the fish and making them feel safe to come down the margins looking for food a lot earlier in the day than they'd normally expect to. And that's why pegs always produce, or pegs with space, especially down the margins, because it gives the fish that confidence knowing that it's safe to move down these margins. Now, the depth, the reason why they want to be in this depth is because that's where the most oxygen is. They're travelling at that depth looking for food, because obviously the first point of contact with food is the surface. Food hits the surface and it falls down, and these bigger fish will always want to be higher up in the water to grab that bait first. So that's what you're looking for. Down the margins, you're looking for shallow water. Shallowest as possible, really. 2 foot or less is perfect, but in this kind of situation, we're on the Loco Lake and the water level's quite high. We've had a lot of rain recently. I'm not going to find 2 foot of water, so I've got to find the minimum amount of depth, which I'm looking about 3.5 foot deep, and that's the depth I've got to fish in. But if I was to not cut the reeds down and fish on a lazy point of view, where I could see my float without doing any bankside management, cutting any vegetation away, then I might be fishing in 5 foot of water, and that's when you get problems. That's when the fish are coming into your peg at a shallower depth than what you're actually fishing at. And so when they do finally arrive, you're foul hooking them because you're not fishing at the correct depth. And that's all it is. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to set up, I'm going to plumb it up, check that I'm fishing the correct depth, and just get everything right. And then I'm going to discuss with you the bait options and how I'm going to feed the peg. Right, I've plummeted up. So the next thing, I just want to run through the rig and everything that I'm doing regarding my setup. Just put my cup of tea down. Right, so we're fishing for big fish down the edge, and the last thing we want to use is tackle where we're going to have problems losing fish. We want to fish nice positive tackle. We're going to be fishing for some big lumps today, so we want to be using a diameter line that's going to really do the business, and we're going to have some confidence when we're playing the fish. So setup wise, I've used a Spire Silk Shot in 020 straight through. Now, I'm a big believer, especially in these kind of situations, not using hook lengths, just fishing direct. And because it's straight through, there's less knots. And because there's less knots, there's less areas where your line can break. So you cannot beat fishing direct, especially for big boys. So that's it, 020 straight through, really robust line, mic'd up properly as well, so I know exactly what diameter I'm using. So let's talk about the rig. Now, that's the depth of my swim, which is 3.5 foot, just over 3 foot. And I've got 020 straight through, 4x14 float, and I've got my bulk right at the bottom. Now this is a deliverer, that's all it is, because I'm going to be using a big bait anyway, which is heavy in itself, so it's not like I'm going to need droppers. The bait's going to be delivered quite quickly down to the bottom, which is where I want it to be. When you're fishing for big carp, you want to hook them in the mouth, and a carp, let's say even, you know, an 8-pound fish, there's a whole lot of body to hook, when really you're just going to end up in problems if you're not putting your rig in correctly, and all you want to do is deliver that bait for the fish to see that bait and take it and accept it in the mouths. So that's why we use a bulk, just to lower that rig in rather than lay it in, which means that you've got more chance of foul looking fish because the line's then going to go over the back of a fish or something. So that's all I'm using is a deliverer, a bulk deliverer, you know, 7 inches away from the hook. 4x14 float, nice heavy float as well to get that bait down and stabilise it. I don't want to use a light float in this depth of water because I want that bait to be stable in my peg. So when a big carp comes in and its big fins are wafting everything about, my hook bait is staying as stable as possible. And that means it's more attractive for the fish. If it's wafting about, they're looking on the bottom for food, and because I'd be using a lighter hook bait, a lighter rig, they're looking for bait on the bottom, and my hook bait's wafting about above them, which means you're not going to catch as many fish. Now, just above the float, this is the key area. I've got back shot, and I've got quite a few back shot. So I've got a 4x14 float, and I've got 4 number 8 back shot, which means when that float's in the water, the back shot is actually causing an L shape in the line, which means when you get a lot of water movement from fish feeding and the finning the bait up off the bottom, you get an awful lot of movement on your float. And without that back shot, what you'll find is, you can imagine without it being there now, and you get any water movement, that your float then drifts away, which means because you're fishing on a shelf, like what we're doing down the margins today, that float is then moving your hook bait into a different depth of water, which means that your hook bait's not on the bottom anymore. With that back shot being there, every time that float moves, the back shot pulls it back. So that's really, really important when you're looking for big fish down the margins. And it's not part of the float's weight, it's actually, it's an addition to the float. It's not inclusive, it's exclusive of the float's weight. Hook-wise, just get it out of the towel, I'm using quite a big 14 hook because I'm using a big bait. If you're using a big bait, you can get away with a bigger hook, and that means you're going to get a better hook hold and less chance of getting, you know, your hook pulled out of better decent fish. Which also means when you're actually putting that hook inside a double corn, cue of meat, double worm, you've got quite a lot of that point showing, so you get better penetration when you get an indication of a bite, or a bite. Right, so pole-wise, I'm going to use a strong pole today. I'm using the Beastmaster commercial, 16 metre pole, but I'm using it at like 14 metres. That's all I've got set up today. Because I'm using a nice strong elastic, 16 latex elastic, so I shouldn't have to ship out much with a fish. I should be able to bring them straight back. But it's a nice strong pole. It can handle a lot of situations, and especially in this scenario where we're going to get in big fish, I might be having to give the pole a bit of stick, and it's strong enough to do that easily. So that's the tackle side. Let's talk about the bait now, and what we're going to be using, how we're going to be feeding it, and what bait choices I'm going to be putting on the hook. Right, let's talk about the feeding now. This is a ground bait, and this is the main source of feed we're going to be feeding down the edge. I've mixed together red krill and a little bit of black swim stim, just to darken it off a little bit. It's just something I like doing, and especially for this lake it seems to work. Now, ground bait, why we're feeding ground bait rather than particle baits. I'm sure you've seen all over the commercial scene now, ground bait down the margins works really well. It's been going on for years. It originated from Hawcroft Fisheries. Steve Clark was the main inventor of it, very good angler, and it's just taken off all over the country since then. Now, really, really positive way of feeding the fish. And I suppose in a way, what it does, it starves them into taking your hook bait, if fed correctly. And by that I mean, feeding the ground bait attracts fish into your peg. You've got all the stimulants and all the attractants in the ground bait that gets fish into your peg. And if you feed it correctly, there's nothing else there apart from your hook bait, which means you get a bite quicker. If you were then to feed loose feed particles in your ground bait, it means those fish will take longer to find your hook bait, and in that time you're mostly going to receive a false indication because they're swimming about, and as a result they move your rig around and pull your float under from a false indication, and that's where you foul up fish. So it's quite a simple process what we're doing today. We're going to be feeding ground bait. I'm going to be using a single piece of bait over the top. Now, how we feed the ground bait is quite important as well. A lot of people, they'd want to feed it in balls, but because we're fishing on a shelf, we want to ensure that where we put that bait is where it goes on the bottom. It creates a bit of a carpet. So what we don't want to do is form it into balls. What I like to do is form it into what's called sandcastles. So I actually push it into my pot, and then when I empty it out, if it's formed a ball, obviously because of the shape of the pot, but as it gets halfway down, it will then explode because you've trapped a lot of air inside it, which means it then spreads over the bottom, but in a more direct area where we're fishing. So that is a general approach, and to start my swim off, I'm going to put 4 pots of ground bait out, just to get my peg going. And then every time I get a fish in my peg, or I miss a bite, or I hook a fish, I'm going to have to refeed that peg again, because the instant reaction from a fish being hooked is it's going to swim off and it's going to waft all that bait about, and that means now we'll have bait not just where where we want them to be feeding, which is where our float's going to be. There could be bait 3 or 4 meters away from where we're fishing, and it's, I suppose in a way, it's a redirecting the fish and saying, look, this is where I want you to feed, by putting another pot out in exactly the same places, bringing those fish back and pinpointing them and letting them know where that entry point of food is coming from. So that's why generally you need quite a bit of ground bait. It's not one of these situations where you can just feed it, leave it for half an hour and then go on it and see if anything's there, because by that time it's all gone. So it's an instant response feeding technique. You feed and you fish, you feed and you fish. You miss a bite, you feed and you fish it. So that's the principle behind it. So let's have a look at the baits, what we're going to be fishing over the top of the ground bait today now. Right, let's have a look at the hook baits now. Quite simple really. I've got 3 choices. Let's minimise what choices I've got, and then I can concentrate and get a better idea quicker of what baits are actually going to work. If I had more choices, it's just going to take me longer to find which is the best bait. So it's about keeping your fishing simple. I've got 3 choices here, and of course different colours as well, which is quite important. So I've got meat, one of my favourites. Dynamite luncheon meat, 8mm cubes, one of those on a hook. Nice heavy bait as well. It's not going to move about on the bottom as much. Brilliant, really, really effective. And also what I like about it is it's quite soft as well. So when you strike, you're pulling it off the hook. So that means you're getting a better penetration on the hook itself. Really, really effective for all styles of carp fishing. Sweet corn, Dynamite XL sweet corn. 2 of those on a 14 hook, perfect. Nice bright colours, and again, a nice heavy bait. It's always opt for heavy baits. It means that when big fish are in your peg, there's less chance of it getting wafted about and it's staying on the bottom exactly where you want it to be. Nice big grains of corn as well. Lovely, lovely quality corn. And last but not least, red krill paste. and especially to go with the red krill ground bait that I'm using. And there are times we know that they're feeding on the ground bait, so let's use a hook bait that actually blends in with the ground bait, acts as a camouflage, and it fools the fish into accepting it more confidently. And of course, again, formed into a nice ball, straight out of the pot, don't have to do anything with it, onto the hook. And all I do is I hook it around my line, around my side puller, so I don't need an extra band or anything on it. Look at that, nice heavy bait again, works really, really well. So there we have 3 simple bait options, and I can guarantee one of those is going to work really, really well, or all of them are. And that's the beauty about having choices, just alternating your baits. You might go in, you might catch a few fish on a certain bait, it might go quiet, and just by changing your hook bait, you can gain an instant response from the fish that are actually still there, whereas if you didn't have those choices on your side tray, you'd think that there weren't any fish there. So always give yourself a few options, not too many, just a few, just to go through the book really, rather than making that decision that there's no fish there. So we've gone through the bait options, hook baits, feed bait. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how to initially feed the peg, and then we're going to start fishing and hopefully catch a few fish. Right, well, I've just hooked my first proper carp. Seems like a good fish. Single piece of meat, really nice positive bite. I'm just gently bringing it in now, and this is the beauty about using the right elastic more than anything else, just so I feel a bit more in control of the fish. Good fish. Feels it anyway. And this is where you need positive line, especially when I'm going to try and land it amongst all these snags. There's every chance that it only needs to brush against that, any kind of debris on the bottom, and I could lose it. So by using the right diameter line, I know that I'm not going to have that problem. Just got to take my time with it now. Really, really fit fish in here as well. So, as you can see, it doesn't want to come in. Just got a glimpse of it there. Not a massive fish, but it's still definitely one worth catching. There we go. Nice mirror carp. Not a mark on it. 6 pounds, 6, 7 pounds. Lovely fish. Nice start to the day anyway. Just slip him in the net. And then the first thing I've got to do now is refeed my peg. Just a little bit of ground bait. Press it down. Just to concentrate those fish again. Because you can imagine I've just hooked that fish and it's spread all that ground bait that I've been feeding around in my swim. So I just want to direct the fish directly to where I want them to feed, which is there. Just tap my pole pot. There you go. Right, well, something's quite interesting has happened here. I've been fishing meat on the hook, catching a lot of F1s, odd carp, and then I've swapped to krill on the hook. Just a small ball, just so I don't have to swap my floats or anything, because obviously it weighs a lot more. And it just seems to be so more selective. I've had 3 bites and 3 fish, and all of them have been carp. And I've had to wait a while for this bite, but I've just been sat there, and this is a big fish. This is a good fish. There we go. Look at that, lovely ghosty. The beauty about the pace was I had no false indications, and I just waited until it shot straight under it, just mimicking that fish sucking that ball in. What a lovely fish. Just slip him in the net. And that's why it's nice to have the choice of baits, because you can then experiment, and you know, whereas if I wouldn't have had the paste on the side, I wouldn't have known that a certain bait would be stronger. And definitely today the paste seems to be the stronger bait. It seems to be really picking out the better fish that are coming into my peg and feeding on the ground bait. And the beauty about it as well, it's the same shade as the ground bait. So it's almost as a bit of a camouflage bait. So sometimes a contrast bait, i.e. corn or meat, that you'd think they'd want to pick up straight away because it stands out, is sometimes the wrong bait. Right, well, as you can see, I've had an absolute cracking day. Caught loads of fish and really enjoyed it. And just shows how easy it is just to keep your fishing simple. Fed ground bait down the edge, caught on meat. Pace seems to be a massive difference in the size of the fish that I was catching. Really targeting the better fish that were coming into my peg and feeding on the ground bait. As you can see, I've had some lovely fish and just thoroughly enjoyed it. So I hope this information's been of use to you, and look forward to seeing you on the bankside, and hopefully be able to put all this information to use and have a cracking day's fishing like what I have today. So best of luck, tight lines, and see you soon on the bankside.